After spending more than 15 years on death row, Kimberly LaGayle McCarthy was executed by lethal injection in Texas. But to understand how she ended up on death row, we need to go back to the summer of 1997, when a neighborly knock turned into a brutal murder. Due to the nature of this case, viewer discretion is advised. All descriptions are factual and handled with care. It was July 21, 1997. In a quiet neighborhood in Lancaster, Texas, 71-year-old Dorothy Booth was inside her home when her phone rang. On the other end, Kimberly asked to borrow some sugar. Dorothy had known her for years. They lived just houses apart, and Kimberly had once worked as an occupational therapist. But she had changed. Cocaine had taken hold of her life, and it was getting worse. But still, Dorothy let her in, and that would be her last act of kindness. When Kimberly stepped into the retired psychology professor's home, she didn't come empty-handed. Hidden somewhere in her clothes was a 10-inch butcher knife, and just moments later, she pulled it out and stabbed Dorothy 5 times. Then she picked up a heavy candle holder and hit her in the face. But she wasn't finished yet. When the elderly woman lay on the floor, motionless, Kimberly took the knife and cut off her left ring finger in order to take her diamond ring. Then, after Dorothy died on her own kitchen floor, Kimberly went through her house, looking for as much cash and valuables she could carry. She then walked out of the house, climbed into Dorothy's white Mercedes, and drove straight to a crack house to buy cocaine. Afterward, she pawned Dorothy's wedding ring for $200, and she used her credit cards 4 separate times in less than 24 hours, including at a neighborhood liquor store. That night, Dorothy Booth's life ended, and Kimberly had vanished, swallowed up by her addiction and the lies that came with it. But the police got after her fast. They got a search warrant for her house, and what they found there made all come crashing down on her. The butcher knife was hidden in her home, and it had been scrubbed clean. But investigators weren't fooled. When they dismantled the handle, dried blood was still hidden in the seams, and a forensic test confirmed it. It was Dorothy's. Kimberly was once an occupational therapist at a nursing home and even tried building a family. But whatever stability she found didn't last. Somewhere along the way, the drugs crept in, and once crack cocaine took hold, everything else fell apart. The job stopped, and the arrest started. In 1990, she was convicted of forgery. Then came prostitution charges, and later theft of services. And each one chipped away at what was left of her life. By the time of the murder, Kimberly was a different woman. She had been married, divorced, and was raising a son, but more than anything, she was desperate. The addiction had her by the throat, and she was willing to do almost anything for her next high, even if it meant spilling blood. After her arrest, Kimberly gave detectives a written statement. The words were hers, but the story felt like a last-ditch attempt to rewrite the truth. She said it all began sometime after midnight on July 21st at her home. 2 men, drug dealers she knew only as Kilo and JC, had been hanging around, partying, and using with her. But when the money ran out and the high wore off, things turned ugly. They weren't just frustrated. They got loud, even aggressive, and Kimberly claimed they threatened to hurt her if she didn't come up with something fast. And that's when the plan was born. Kilo told her to call Dorothy and ask to borrow some sugar. Nothing suspicious, just a neighborly favor. But it wasn't sugar they were after. Kimberly claimed she stayed outside, but Kilo and JC didn't. They forced their way in, and minutes later, they walked out carrying Dorothy's purse, her car keys, and anything else they could grab. Kimberly climbed behind the wheel of Dorothy's white Mercedes and drove them away. She later admitted pawning Dorothy's belongings for cash, using her credit cards to buy cigarettes and liquor, and trading it all for more crack. But the physical evidence against her was overwhelming. Dorothy's blood was on the knife, her ID was in Kimberly's possession, and surveillance footage showed Kimberly using the stolen cards. There was no trace of anyone else, just her. And for the jury, that was enough. In November 1998, they convicted her of capital murder and sentenced her to death. But this wasn't the whole story. Long before Dorothy opened her door that day, there had been warning signs, dark, violent signs, that Kimberly was capable of far worse than anyone wanted to believe. During sentencing, prosecutors revealed something else. DNA evidence linked Kimberly to 2 unsolved murders from 1988, almost 10 years earlier. Both victims were elderly women from Dallas County, 81-year-old Maggie Harding and 85-year-old Jetty Lucas. Both had been murdered inside their homes, and both cases had gone cold. But now the threads were suddenly tied together. Maggie wasn't a stranger to Kimberly. She had known her nearly her entire life, a trusted family friend who had helped plan Kimberly's wedding, let her store furniture at her house, and welcomed her as if she were her own family. But none of that mattered when Kimberly walked through her door in December 1988. Kimberly had once done part-time office work for Maggie, which had been enough to earn her trust, and enough to learn the layout of her home. But Kimberly had noticed something else. According to Maggie's niece, her aunt kept a large amount of cash in the house, not in a bank, not locked in a safe, but inside her home, and Kimberly knew it. Maggie was stabbed repeatedly through the chest, the abdomen, and the face. One of the wounds pierced straight into her heart. But that wasn't all. Her jaw was broken, her cheekbone shattered, and her brain was bleeding. The kind of injuries that don't come from a single moment of rage, but from a sustained, brutal attack, likely with a metal meat tenderizer that police later found in the kitchen sink. And when it was over, her purse was gone. Just days later, another call came in. This time it was Jetty Lucas, 85 years old, physically disabled, and barely able to defend herself. She was a distant cousin of Kimberly's mother, but those family ties meant nothing when the front door closed. Jetty was stabbed in the face, straight through her eyes. Her head and neck were struck with such force that one of her ears was torn, her skull fractured, and her brain bleeding from within. Lying near her body was a claw hammer, its curved end still stained. And just like before, her wallet and purse had been emptied. The similarities between the two cases were hard to ignore. Both victims were elderly women, both trusted Kimberly, and both had been beaten, stabbed, and left for dead. And every time Kimberly had walked away with just enough cash to get high again. She was never tried for these previous murders, but investigators said the DNA told its own story. But Kimberly wasn't one to give up easily. She appealed, and in 2001, she actually won. Her conviction was overturned on a legal technicality because investigators had taken her statement without her lawyer present. But Texas prosecutors didn't back down. They retried her, and in 2002, the outcome was the same. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. Over the next decade, Kimberly's lawyers continued to fight. They said she was a drug addict, not a serial killer, and claimed race had played a role in her sentencing, but none of it changed the outcome. She was first scheduled to die in January 2013, but was granted a temporary reprieve just hours before her execution. And this happened again in April. But on June 26, 2013, there were no more delays. Kimberly spent her final hours behind thick concrete walls just a few feet from the room where it would all end. She hadn't spoken to reporters in years, refusing every request. But with the guards, she let a few jokes slip. Nothing big, just brief moments of levity in a day otherwise wrapped in silence. She wasn't allowed to choose a special final meal. They brought her a last breakfast, oatmeal, fruit, and chicken sandwiches at 1:48 a.m. She ate in the stillness of the early morning, then spent the rest of the day packing up what little she had left. She met with the chaplain, spoke with her spiritual advisor, and even sat for a final visit with the man who had once been her husband. And then she waited. When strapped to the gurney, her last words were clear. "This is not a loss. This is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all." As the drug started to take effect, she said, "God is great," before closing her eyes. She took hard, raspy, loud breaths for several seconds before becoming quiet. Then her chest moved up and down for another minute before she stopped breathing. Kimberly became the 500th person executed by lethal injection in Texas since the reinstatement, and the first woman executed in the United States in nearly 3 years. After the execution, Dorothy's daughter, Donna Aldred, said that her mother was an incredible woman who was taken before her time. After almost 16 years, she said, "The finality of this event has allowed me to say goodbye to my mother. We are grateful to see justice fulfilled." The victim's family shared that Kimberly never expressed remorse over killing Dorothy or the other 2 elderly victims. Kimberly LaGayle McCarthy was pronounced dead at 6:37 p.m. She was 52 years old. What do you think? Has justice been served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.